Morning. So if you just pruned your fig tree, this is the perfect video for you because I'm going to show you how to process all that wood, all those cuttings, into a whole bunch more fig trees. All right, so these are variegated figs, as you can see by looking at them. That stripy color actually makes really pretty foliage and fruit. And this is how to propagate them. So I like to cut them into about 6 to 7 inch sections. You can make them longer if you want. And special thanks to Clean Creek Tropicals for the cuttings. They gave me a number of long cuttings for my students. And so I'm gonna put these in my classroom, but I wanted to do it as a little bit of an experiment. So these were about twice as long before I trimmed them. And I'm gonna have some of them sitting in water. And you usually wanna start them in water, mainly so that they don't dry out, but also to encourage rooting. I'm trying to see if this has any, you can barely see. So at the positions where you would see a leaf normally, or a bud, as you can see here, there's a bud and a leaf scar, this little round circle here. That's where a leaf used to be. You would call that a leaf scar. Right above that is a bud. And that position is where new growth, like a branch or fruit or something, might come out of. So this would be called a node. This section in between the nodes is called the internode. And when you let these soak in water, typically what you'll see happen is around the same spot where the node would be, you'll see these little white bumps. Those little white bumps are the start of roots. And so by putting these in water, you're encouraging the cutting to fight for survival. You're basically letting the cutting know it has two choices. It can either dry out and die, or it can put out roots at the part that's under the water. And so the cutting doesn't know that it's eventually going to be moved to soil. Right now it thinks that it's going to die unless it puts out roots. And so that's basically what these cuttings are trying to do, is they're trying to survive. And so they're putting out roots in water. And it's a little bit easier for them to pull water from water because it's extremely high surface area as compared to soil, which might be grainy and things like that. These top halves I cut off, I'm also going to put in a media, but instead of using water, I'm gonna put them in this plastic bag over here with a pre-dampened paper towel. So I like to squeeze most of the water out so it's not dry, but just so it's a source of moisture in case the air in that bag drops below 100% humidity. And what I'm hoping that the root's gonna do is it's gonna think it's in soil, and because it's humid and it's gonna be dark and warm, I'm gonna put it in a warm spot in my garage that's controlled. And the hope is that these positions will also root. And I can already tell that they're already attempting to have this meristematic tissue right here, which is basically cells that are like stem cells in plants. Those special cells will differentiate into roots. Right now, they're not sure what they want to do, but once I give them an excuse, like put them in a plastic bag that feels wet, like they're under the ground, then they're also going to hopefully put out roots. But it's an experiment because I want to see what roots faster. Do cuttings under water root faster, or do cuttings that are in a damp, dark environment that are in controlled temperature root faster? That's the question. I don't know. Also, I'm kind of adding an extra variable, so this isn't totally scientific, but I'm taking some of this Clonex, which is a rooting hormone that in theory should encourage the tissue near the node or wherever I put it. Actually, I can even put it on the inner node just for fun, just to see what happens. This hormone should trigger any cells just under the bark layer called the cambium. In the cambium layer right under here, there's also stem cells. And so this hormone could trigger cells that are hiding right under the bark to also turn into roots. And I've done this before where I kind of wrote this on the inner node, and then you'll just have like this huge amount of root growth that pops out of the node as well. So I'm kind of curious if this rooting hormone does anything useful. So I'm just gonna below my finger here. You never want to contaminate the container. In my opinion, I've seen people just stick random cuttings and branches and whatnot right into their jar. And I would never do that because you might contaminate it with harmful yeasts or fungi, and those fungi could cause tissue damage to the roots, and then you basically create an infection that can be passed from organism to organism. Another reason is because this actually has a suppressant for killing things like fungi, and so if they are capable of existing in there, you're going to create basically a super fungus that's going to be extremely detrimental to plants that's completely immune to antifungals. Kind of like how humans, we've kind of created these super bugs by feeding antibiotics to our animals and then eating those animals and inoculating ourselves with bacteria that are immune to antibiotics. I don't want to do that to my plants, so something to think about. So you want to make sure that you put this stuff on. If you want to use the rooting hormone, you don't need it. I mean, they're already growing roots without anything, but I'm kind of curious if you could promote additional growth and if the Clonex applied cuttings end up growing faster, because basically what's going to happen is these are going to grow extremely slow until they have enough root mass to be able to support the top half of the tree. So in theory, if you could build root mass a little bit faster, you might get to a fruiting tree a little bit faster because you'll have enough root mass to give water to the leaves, to allow sufficient leaves to be able to absorb enough CO2 and sunlight, to be able to make sugars, to be able to make fruit. So that's my thinking behind this experiment. If I could speed that process up, I can have fruit a little bit faster, maybe same year instead of having to wait a year. So anyway, this is a simple way to prepare your cuttings. And as you can see, these are apical cuttings where they have that tip. That tip is a bud. So the apex of the branch means the tip. So apical is of the apex. So these are apical cuttings, whereas this one, for example, is not apical. So the top has been cut off and it's probably one of those tips there. And I'm gonna kind of compare whether this type of cutting grows better or an apical cutting, because I've heard people try to tell me, oh, if you have an apical cutting, all of the growth is gonna go to the tip bud and it's not gonna go to roots. Okay, so side-by-side comparison, we're gonna stick these both in the bag and then we're gonna plant them in the soil and we're gonna see if that's actually true or not in this single instance, which of course isn't very scientific because there might be other variables, but I'm kind of curious myself. So this might generate some anecdotal evidence that it does or doesn't matter. We'll find out, who cares? But it is kind of interesting, so I care. All right, and I like to apply directly to the node like I said, and you can even do some on the bottom if you want. I don't think I've ever seen roots on fig come out of here. They usually come out of here pretty heavily, but why not? That's probably plenty. All right, and then I'm gonna probably let these just sit on the counter here and not completely dry out, but I want them to probably callus for like an hour or so. And then I'm gonna put them in the plastic bag. I want to give them a chance to let some of the excess moisture evaporate just so they don't become a breeding ground for mold. But anyway, I hope this helps you to know how to process your fig cuttings and to hopefully turn them into more fig trees. Thanks for watching.